So are we good on the streaming? All right, awesome. Thank you very much. So hi everybody. I'm so glad and happy to welcome you to the launch of Andrion by the fantastic Alex Penland. Thank you all so much for coming. So we're going to do the bio stuff to begin with and get all that. So Alex Penland is a former museum kid. They spent their childhood running rampant through the Smithsonian museums, which kicked off an early career as a child adventurer. How a film has not been made about your life is a mystery.
It's forthcoming. Not actually, but maybe one day.
Alex has worked in the field with NASA scientists, linguists, and acclaimed photographers. Now twice a Pushcart nominated author, Alex lives in Scotland while studying for a PhD in creative writing at the University of Edinburgh. Prior adventures include founding a writing organization in Iowa, collaborating on micro operas, diving with sharks, presumably at the same time, and
I thought you knew me, Lynn.
and volunteering with the Smithsonian for nearly a decade. Their work has been internationally published, appearing in Interzone Only magazine. Andrion is their first novella. Catch them on most social media as Alex Penname and find more information on their website at www.alexpenland.com. You got your fan club in.
I'm so excited.
And as president of that fan club, you will have to fight. Alex has not actually seen the blurb
I
that I wrote for your book, so I'm just gonna
have a
embarrass
sneak
you.
peek on the back now. Yeah.
I was asked to write a blurb for your book, and everything here is true, and you're absolutely worthy of every single bit of praise. And I intend to embarrass you fully with it.
Excellent. Watch me die on it, guys.
This is just a treat for all of you, don't worry. The old saying that freedom is taken, not given, was never more true than in Alex Penland's thrilling debut, Andrion. Raised with far more liberties than other girls, Fiery Callus rails against the injustice of being forced to remain silent on important political issues, while every male citizen may voice his every waking thought. Since her own father once led a rebellion, she expects to find sympathy and understanding in her own household, but rarely does a fight to change the minds of society ever go smoothly. It's a tale as old as time, as true now as it ever was, and Penland's obvious talent for glorious sensual imagery helps make the world of ancient Greece feel no more than a single shadow breath away.
My God, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Her prose is also fantastic, if you can't tell.
I'm available for blurbs if anyone. I can't promise they'll be as good. So we're gonna get to some questions. So Alex, could you tell us, how did your writing journey begin?
Well, it started at the ripe age of like 1.5.
Going way back, okay?
Yeah, we're going way back. The correct answer to that is I actually don't really know when my writing journey started. So my father is in the audience today taking pictures, as you can all see, and he can attest to that I have been writing and making up stories for literally as long as I've been able to string together a sentence. My first published story was a serial in the school newspaper when I was like, what, 7 years old? Yeah, 7 years old. And I kind of just never slowed down. So writing for me is a way of expressing not necessarily how I feel, but the ways in which I see the world and the ways in which I have always interacted with the people around me. And so like looking back at like my really old stuff from when I was like a child, this is relevant for like actual mature stuff later. There's a lot of it that's talking about sort of like the unfairness of being seen kind of secondhand and being seen sort of like as secondary and overlooked, the way children are. One of my pieces that I'm working on that is not this book, although this book has shadows of it, is something that I wrote when I was 13 that had that perspective from the main character, a 12-year-old girl who has those strong feelings about not being seen and not being heard. I was 12 when I wrote it. I was her age. I'm now her mother's age. And I am now working on the piece from a slightly different perspective. But I mean, I guess the reason why my answer goes back so early is like, I mean, number one, when I was like 1.5, I had I got the first 13 letters of the alphabet down before I actually managed to start like full sentences. But also because that's something like I feel like my writing journey is very layered. It sort of builds on itself over and over and over. And yeah, I'm not really quite sure where to end that, but there you go.
That's okay. That's what I'm here for. So, as a huge fan of your work and someone who gets to read stuff off before you send it out, a lot of the things you're saying feel very real to me. Like your work tends to be very layered. Like it's great on a first read, but on a second read, you uncover more and more things. And I think like that speaks to me, like the talent that you have for creating a world that is both interesting and entertaining, but also speaks to a deeper meaning of something else. There's always something else going on, and I'm reminded of there's an Audre Lorde quote about the vulnerability of being seen, how it's damaging, but we can also we want it and we crave it, but at the same time we're afraid of judgment. That rings very true for your work.
Yeah, I feel like my writing, particularly the polished writing that I actually show people, is very much my way of being vulnerable like that. I can be quite an open person, but I never feel quite as exposed as when I'm writing, as when I'm putting something out there. This is literally just me laying my heart bare. So yeah, also thank you. This is just embarrassing Alex hours, apparently. I mean, it's my book launch. Of course it's for complimenting me, but I'm not expecting it.
I'm having so much fun. Great. So moving on. So what inspired you to write Andrion in the first place?
I have no idea. So it goes back and sort of that sense of layering. So I was given a book on Greek mythology when I was far too young to be reading a book on Greek mythology, and it's something that has always really fascinated me, and it's something that every young kid, there's dinosaurs, there's pirates, there's Greek mythology, there's Norse mythology, like you have something. Greek mythology was mine, and I was so interested in it that when I was an undergrad, I sort of accidentally found my way into a classics minor. I got to the end of my degree and realized that I could get both my accidental anthropology minor and my accidental classics minor if I just did one class, which was a trip to Greece, the first time I ever went. So it's something that's just sort of like piled on itself over and over the years. But this story is not about Greek mythology at all. One of the things that I really loved about going to Greece was realizing like, okay, these were mythological places to me. These were places that I had read about that I loved. But also I'm not Greek. I don't really know. I didn't really know anything about Greece, like modern day Greece, before I ever went there. And that sort of kicked off this interest in the daily life of people thousands and thousands of years ago. And I'm not really quite sure what it is. There is something about seeing the fact that people thousands and thousands of years ago, and this is relatively modern in some of the stuff that I research, were all people who lived the same way that we did. They had the same feelings, they had the same connections. There's, footprints fossilized of children wandering away from their parents on a beach from 10, 20,000 years ago that's just out there, that exists. And there's something about that thread that just is incredible to me. And so one of the other things that I've noticed while I was doing my accidental classics minor, I was also had the chance to go study in Russia just for like 10 days. It wasn't like a full semester abroad, but I made some good friends there, and we had like, some really good conversations about it. And hearing my Russian friends talk about what it was like living in Russia, in Moscow, and sort of the stories that their parents had, it's always sort of sparked off this connection in me of like sort of the Athenian versus Spartan and Peloponnesian War. Not in the sense that Russia is in any way Greek, but in the sense that it's sort of this idea of the collective society versus the individualistic society. And I haven't explored it quite as much in this one because this is very much focused in Athens only. But the first idea really of Andrion was looking at these are sort of like universal feelings, universal to us. These are stories and battles that get fought again and again and again. And going back and looking at it in this very specific microcosm of history, and I should be holding this name out, and looking at sort of like what that was like, not necessarily for the great battles fought, not necessarily for the leaders, not necessarily for the warriors, but for the people who lived there, and what that meant for the everyday life, and what that meant for, you know, a woman who grew up there, or who grew up in something that was familiar, but, you know, different. The familiarity of that is something that really just appeals to me. And the idea of like looking at, you know, sort of battles that keep getting fought again and again and again through different cultures, through different times, and very vastly different ways. I do not mean to make a comparison between the cultures necessarily that much. It's fascinating to me. And that's sort of where this started, as looking at that daily life and looking at not just the daily life, but the world in which a person would have lived at that time. And then I changed it drastically.
So what you're saying is really interesting, because I've noticed a theme in your work is it's often from the perspective of someone who doesn't have power. And in the one case where they do have power, they definitely don't want it and they keep trying to give it back.
Wait, which one is that?
Is your other project?
We'll yeah. Oh, yeah. My other project. Yes, you are correct. Okay.
We could talk about that later. But the struggle for power and who has it and who doesn't. Kind of theme. So one of the things that I mentioned in the book, the very embarrassing book, is that Callus rails quite rightly against the obvious injustice of being denied a vote simply because of our gender. So real world events of the last few years have reminded us forcibly that the rights of minorities, particularly the LGBTQIA plus community, and female-bodied persons in particular, have come under fire. So a two-parter question. Firstly, to what extent did you draw on your own experiences and identity to form the main characters in Andrion?
Extensively. And my mother's watching this, so I hope she knows what I'm talking about here. So yeah, quite extensively. I would say that the heart of this book and the heart of the upcoming project that is related to this book is very much between Khalees and her father Nico. And it's easy to read this, I think, and see Nico as like, oh, he's just the bad man who is being anti-feminist and not, you know, just fighting against her. And that's really not the case. Nico is a revolutionary. He's done things that nobody would have ever thought was possible. And I mean, all of the history of Greece. I took a class on ancient Greek economics in preparation for writing this. And one of the things that is really, really, I think one of the things that I think is somewhat difficult to understand without really sort of looking into it is exactly how much the abolishment of slavery would impact anywhere in ancient Greece. It was, I mean, everything was based on slavery. And one of the things that Nico does, and I mean, it's literally like the first 3 sentences of the book, so spoiler alert, I guess, is he frees the slaves of Athens because he himself was a slave. And he overturns the entire economy. And I mean, just puts the entire city on its head. So he himself is very much a revolutionary. But he does this with very sort of specific ideas in mind. He sees his daughter and he thinks, well, I'm going to work so hard that you'll be able to marry well and never have to work a day in your life. You'll never have to suffer the things that I suffered. And his main conflict with Khalees really boils down to the fact that she appreciates that. She loves it. She loves those battles, but it is the world that she has grown up in. And the ideals that she has grown up with have changed so much because of the action that he did. And because of the work that he did, because of his own revolution, that she has different choices that she can make. She's able to see the world in a different light and say, well, I know this is what you fought for, but it's not actually what I want. It's something else. And this is a conversation that I've had with my mom many, many times. Which is it's a conflict that comes with a lot of respect on my end, but it is very much still a conflict, and I see it. I see it with a lot of queer people. I see it with a lot of, I mean, anyone who really wants to make a change, pushing back against the previous generation. There's always this constant misunderstanding from the revolutions of the previous generation against the revolutions of the current generation. And that's mostly the real world stuff that I've drawn it from, is from wanting to take that next step forward. And that the next step forward is always so exhausting. I feel like once you get to the end of the step, you don't want anyone to take any other steps. You're done. It's fine. You won your battles, but then there are still battles to come. And one of the main themes of this book, honestly, is that concept of continuously fighting and redefining what it means to be free.
That's a great answer.
Thank you.
And it makes perfect sense. Like we appreciate the struggle and the battle of people who have gone before us, but at the same time, the inroads that they may have made in a certain field don't always cover exactly what we want or need.
Exactly. And things change so much over that course of time. One of the things that I really, really enjoy about studying history is you'll see all these same battles like sort of rise and fall and rise and fall. And it's one of those things where it's like history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. It's always sort of the same thing over and over again, because you always have this sort of push and pull. And on one hand, that's not a bad thing. It's something that's, it's important to think about. It's important to think about like what those next steps are. Sometimes those revolutions do not end well. I think ultimately most of them do provide something important though.
Well, that segues very nicely into the second part of my twofold question, which is, secondly, what was the larger point that you were making here in this book, and why do you feel that it's important to highlight these themes in contemporary fiction?
For a lot of the reasons I just stated.
I know. It's a big, all-encompassing question.
It is. I think the reason is because, again, this goes back to my lessons from classics. Ancient Greece, particularly ancient Greek theater, was, that was the bulk of ancient Greek literature. The theater was a place where you could explore what was taboo. And it was a place where you could really think about things that you weren't otherwise allowed to think about. The reason why a lot of those plays are so outlandish is because how else were you supposed to talk about something outlandish? Like, what are you supposed to do with that? So I think that still holds true. I think that's something that has been an unending line throughout all of literature, throughout all of history. It's a place where you can explore things in a safe way, in a way that lets you personally go through different experiences and make the decisions that are right, or come to the conclusions that are right for you. Broaden your horizons in a way that maybe you couldn't otherwise. It's one of the reasons why it's so important to read literature that maybe doesn't always appeal directly to you. And because you'll find things that maybe you wouldn't have found otherwise. It's just how it works. So yeah, I think and secondly, is because the people who come after us, it's a way for them to have conversations with us. It's impossible to remember things after just a couple of generations if you don't have it written down in some way. We've seen this a lot. There are so many wonderful thinkers who did not believe in writing, and so we only have the things that people wrote about them. Socrates, Pythagoras, we know his mathematics. We don't necessarily know a lot of the things that he said to his followers as a philosopher, because he did not believe in writing. He believed that you should be able to argue with someone. So who the hell are we to think that we can put down our thoughts and not have someone argue back? Like, come on. I disagree with him, but the people like Pythagoras, the problem with that is that they don't actually get to make their argument after a certain point in time.
I would love to see a debate between you and Pythagoras. I just like throwing that out there.
Yeah. Oh, some of the people I would love to talk to, like, he would be up on the list, just because I think he would be fascinating conversation. And he has a point, honestly. He does have a point.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with him entirely.
But then it's almost like the beauty of living in the moment, but then if you don't secure it, then other people can enjoy the moment, even if it is only a copy of what you enjoyed.
Exactly, yeah. If you don't preserve that memory in some way, then you were the only one to actually have it, which for some things is wonderful. I do believe that there are some things that should be ethereal and should not necessarily be preserved because it's impossible to truly preserve them. But if there is something that you want to have your voice heard, you want to have out there, then it can be very, very important to make sure that it is out there in a way that people will be able to see and maybe even argue with after you're gone.
Yeah, I agree. And I know that you've talked about like the interest that you've had in this particular realm for a really, really long time.
Yeah.
I'm not making a niche comment. And
Thank you. Thank you.
and
No, 30s are good for me. I've been waiting for 30 since I was 3 years old. Like there's no shame
now
there.
you're here enjoying.
I'm so enjoying it.
So one of the things that I wondered about when I was reading this is I know that you had done a huge amount of research on this topic, like excessively, and I love it. I love that that's who you are, and it's probably why we're friends.
Can I pause to tell an anecdote?
Yes.
Okay, so
I'm about to ask you a question related to the anecdote.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, are you? Okay, well then you do it because you know this anecdote already. Okay, ask the question first. I'm getting ahead of myself.
I know, sure, go on. Go, tell your act.
Okay. So when I first sent this book to Knight Errant Press, it was like substantially different. I had not been to Greece in 10 years. I wrote it during lockdown. A lot of it was like sort of me remembering where things were on Google Maps, that sort of thing, because I couldn't go. But when I got to my PhD, again, I'm working on a related project. And so I got the chance to go just explore Greece for 5 weeks to do research for the current one. And so of course I was like, oh shit, I need to change a whole bunch of stuff. There was only one absolutely massively glaring error. I actually got it pretty well done otherwise, but there were a couple of things I'm like, this can't not go in the book. Now that I've like seen this and been there, or even just like hung out with friends or traveled around somewhere and be like, okay, this has to go in there. So I signed the contract with Knight Errant Press and then almost immediately was like, hey, can I send you an update? I'm really glad that they liked it. Fortunately, thankfully.
Who doesn't like someone being thorough?
I was thorough, yes. But anyways, yes, that's the anecdote. It's done with a lot of love.
It's something that honestly I really do appreciate about you, both as a friend and a fellow writer, is that you take the time and you put in the effort to do that research to make sure that the world building feels real. And I really wasn't kidding, like you made the world of ancient Greece feel literally right there next to me while I was reading this. And I was wondering, through all that research, were there things that did not make it into the final book that you had to? Yeah, that's always a fun one because now we get behind the scenes.
Yes. Let me think. So there were a couple of scenes that didn't make it in, but so the main thing that I actually is missing from this book is that there is another character that the main trio meets who I really, really love, who is not in this book at all because he meets them after the end of this book. He's one of my favorite characters. He's a Spartan. He's ridiculous. He's given a task when he's like 17 or so, as young citizen Spartan males were, to go out and kill a bunch of slaves in the field to keep them afraid properly, because they outnumbered the citizens like something like 50-1. It was ridiculous. My Greek teacher is watching this. Please don't quote me on that number. I'm just making that up on the spot, but it is something like that. It's like really, really massive. He decided not to do that and just sort of wandered off to Thebes on what I'm calling an impromptu Rumspringa, and ended up just like drinking wine and enjoying the more like not quite the Athenian life. He didn't quite go that far, but like sort of enjoying a much more relaxed life than he would have had in Sparta. And then when he has to go back, he's like not happy about it. So he's missing from this, and I'm really sad about that. But again, related projects, like he will be coming.
And was there anything else, about like the world building itself that you kind of felt like, I can't quite get this in here in a natural way?
Yeah, that's the rest of the world. So, yeah, so this focuses entirely on Athens. It doesn't have any of the other city-states or anything in it. And one of the things sort of in the next upcoming project that I really, really am excited about exploring is I get to see the way that the Athenian Revolution has impacted everyone else. I should make it very clear here that the Athenian Revolution in this book did not happen. A lot of the technology here, like I've tried to make it clear, there's a lovely glossary in the back. I've tried to make it clear what is real terminology and what is stuff that I made up. I've had a couple people read this and go, "This is just historical fiction." I'm like, "No, there's robots, guys. It's not." But yeah, the revolution in the book has wider impacts on the rest of the world. The same way anything that happened in Athens would have wider impacts on the rest of the Hellenistic world. And I really don't get a chance to look into that in this one, but it's coming.
Keep saying that. So it's natural then that my next question is going to be, so without giving any spoilers, the end of Andrion is, it is an ending. It is a little bit open to interpretation.
I believe you texted me, Alex, what the fuck?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
It's a good ending, I promise.
I think I was mad that there wasn't more of it.
Yeah.
So I demanded that there is be more of it. So my question is, there going to be more of it?
There is going to be more of it, yes. So I'm currently working on my PhD at the University of Edinburgh, as it says in my bio. And the ending of this book, this is a little bit of a prelude to the current book that I'm working on for my PhD, which is Khalees in the Wider World, and that's all I'm going to say about it. But I'm really, really excited. It's going to be very different from this one. It's very much a love letter to classical studies and a love letter to all of the ways that literature and words and people and names have survived or not from antiquity. So it's formatted a bit differently, but it's the same characters, it's the same world, and it will definitely answer the questions that you have at the end, I promise.
Okay, that's good to know that you're writing a sequel to something that I really want to read. And at the same time, the world that you've created, I know that you have based it largely in Athens, but it feels so real, it feels so large. And also, while this is, Khalees' story, there are other characters that I would love to see a different perspective from.
My God, yes.
Yes. Would you consider doing, sequels or prequels from other characters' point of view?
Other characters' point of view will happen during the sequel. So we'll have there's more from Nico's point of view. There's more from Perseus's point of view, who is a character that shows about 2/3 of the way through, but who I really, really love. I wish she had a little bit more time here, but she just didn't. Khalees was not at the point yet where she could have more time, unfortunately. But they will be more present in the next one. And then there's always there are always options to see more things. I really love this world. I love these characters. I love this setting. So my roommate, who is Roman, has also been trying to get me to write one set in Rome as well. So that may also be happening.
Thanks, Claudia. Keep the pressure on. So what are you working on right now?
My God.
I know. That's why I left a huge amount of space for
that. Is a huge amount of space. Okay, so I'm working on the upcoming project for my PhD dissertation. I am currently doing my hopefully last round of editing on the novel I accidentally wrote during my master's degree.
As you do.
As you do, yes. Which is wonderful, and also is so there's another thread through a lot of my stories that has to do with language and creating language and interacting with language. This one I really got to stretch my ancient Greek muscles, which is really nice. All the translations in here are my own. But in the other one that I'm working on, I have created something like 10 languages. They're all part of a language family, but it's very linguistically focused. I really get to explore a lot of the language side of things. There are lots of bilingual characters. It's a lot of fun. What else am I working on? I have a short story that's potentially going to be a novel that is also very language related. That is about erased language. It deals with a great-grandmother, a father, and a daughter who are the last 3 speakers of their language after it has been essentially erased from the place in which they live, and the ways in which that affects them. It is fantasy. It is a magic language. It is fun as hell. But it does have some very deep bits to it.
It's actually one of my favorite things that you've ever written.
Thank you.
And if it ever becomes a novel, I would like you to know it's because I just whinged about it incessantly.
you and others. You and others.
Thanks
but
again, Claudia.
But that one is. I'm really, really excited about that one. I really wanted to make it into something bigger. I think there's a lot there. I have a sort of on hiatus opera that has been one of the micro operas that I worked on was really, really nice. I'm really hoping that the composer will still work with me. I've been trying to sort of make that into a full opera that has not left my mind, but has been a little bit of a sticking point.
Can you tell us, because it was really fun to hear and to hear how you kind of came about that? Can you tell us like what it's about?
So it's called Three Iterations of Odysseus, and it is I think it was 4 lines written in Homeric verse. I don't think the Homeric verse made it into this one, but it is in the other book. About Odysseus and the journeys that he traveled. And then it was sort of exploring like the ways in which things are erased over time. So different parts of it were erased to have like sort of different meanings. It was about 10 minutes long in opera, even though I only wrote 4 lines, but they were really good 4 lines, I promise. Yeah, it was really interesting. It's one of those things, again, like because this story is still sort of the center of my world at the moment. I've got a lot of like extra things sort of coming off of that because this is where my headspace is. I've got a piece coming out in Interzone 296 that is also, it's a Tiresias story. So it's set about 1,000 years before this. But it's Tiresias essentially. There's not much else I can say about that, but it's fantastic. I really love it. Yeah.
For those of us who don't know who Tiresias is.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. let me rephrase. So Tiresias is a blind seer. He is most famous in Oedipus Rex, the story of Oedipus. He is the one who divulges all the terrible secrets that Oedipus has. And there's a lot of sort of little bits and pieces where he shows up. He's kind of a secondary character. But one of the things that I found most interesting about Odysseus is that he was quote unquote cursed to spend 7 years living as a woman. He did not know it was only going to be 7 years when he was turned, and then she lived and got married and had children. Like she was fully and completely a woman. That was her gender identity. And then she encountered a similar situation that got her cursed in the first time and changed him back. And so the story itself is about the man who married her during those 7 years.
It's also awesome. So
yeah,
I was gonna say that, but it really is.
Yeah, that's coming out soon, hopefully. 295 is coming out, so it'll be in the next volume after that.
It feels like such a natural like relative to this book because it has the same beauty and poetry of language, but with the same like fascinating narrative and character study as well. I'm just embarrassing it a little bit more.
Yes.
Yeah. So a lot of the things that you talked about tonight have been to do with language and your love of language. Is there anything that you haven't done yet that you would really like to do? What is the ultimate goal?
I would like to do something with more complicated writing system, focused on the writing. Dear God. I really like words, guys. I do have something. So I have a series that I had up on Patreon called The Letter Mage. It's like a YA series that dealt with individual sigils that were made for each person from like the alphabet that they had. I would really love to give that like a proper rewrite. I'm really, really fond of those characters in that story. But I would like to do something with a more complicated writing system at some point. That's just a little bit difficult to do in print because then you have to like, if you're me, you make like a whole font and things, and you have to like, it's very difficult. It's a lot. But I would very much like to. Yes.
That actually would be interesting. I feel like that's an interesting way of like disrupting text in kind of a new way. Is like, would it be within regular prose itself, or would you, are you interspersing them?
Yeah. I mean, it would have to be part of it. Yeah. But this is the thing: is this also requires people to like actually want to read it.
Who wouldn't want to read that? That's so good.
I feel like I'm pushing it with the one with like the 10 language family. Or 10 languages, not 10 language families. I'm not that crazy yet.
It was the word that we
yet is doing a lot of work there. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, that all sounds good. And like I'm just a fan. I'm a fan of everything you write. It's pretty clear. I only have talented friends. So that's worked out well. Is there anything that you are planning for next year that you could give a little hint at?
Before
we go to some Q&A.
I do have a non-language related one.
What?
So I do have a novella that is that I'm currently looking for publication that is about a chosen one. It's sort of the space between books, you know, like at the end of a story, like some chosen one fantasy story, they go home and they spend time at home, and then the second book they have to go off again. And this is about neither of those stories about the time that she spends at home. It's got a lot of sheep in it. I got to actually do edits on it, staying on a sheep farm in the Highlands. So all the sheep parts are accurate. Of course, that's the important part. And yeah, it's really very calming. It has a lot, it's a romance. It has a lot of like sort of dealing with the psychological parts of being someone who was in that position, who was ran off when they were 15 years old and is now coming home at 22, battle hardened. And sort of like the trauma and everything that comes along with that, and still finding themselves in a place like, did we really fight on the right side of the war? Did we actually make the right decisions here? Is this like I've been following a princess through all of this. Like maybe she has potential other reasons to be involved in this war rather than just being on the side of the people. Like lots of different thoughts there. So I'm really hoping I find a good home for it soon. It's I'm quite proud of it.
As you should be. And
Thank you.
again, this is another version of a power struggle, only a different one. Someone who, rather than like Kelly's, who doesn't have power and wants it, someone who had power and is starting to wonder, was I doing the right thing with it?
Yeah. And also someone who is very deliberately sort of walking that line between having power and not having power. Because the main character in that story is very much a self-described knight. So she is following someone who she believes is her liege, and then starts questioning that liege and says, okay, well, maybe I'm going to start following the other person you're fighting against instead. Or maybe like, do I want to be on my own? Do I think I have the ability to make those choices? Do I really like know enough? Do I want to be that person? Or am I going to be someone who is supporting and just being conscious about that choice?
Yeah. So before we go to Q&A, so get your questions ready. What was your favorite part of writing, Andrion?
Actually, could I just read the scene I liked writing best? It's very short.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Go for it.
Here we go. I'm gonna change hands.
It's a treat.
I haven't actually held the book before this, so give me a moment. Here we go. It's only on 2 pages. This is page 17 if anyone wants to read along. There we go. My father's lamp was lit. An oddity, but it gave me some light as I came home. I removed my sandals in the courtyard and walked up the stairs, making no sound with which to be noticed. My fingers trailed through the fronds of potted palms against the frescoes of our painted walls as I drifted barefoot to my room. The pebbled floor was cool and slightly damp with humid air. The wooden balcony upstairs was smooth. The house, occupied only by my father and myself, was silent but for the faint turbulence of steam in the house pipes. When I opened the door to my room, I put pressure on the noisy hinge, muting the metal, and entered unnoticed. My room was cluttered. A half-finished peplos hung on my loom, fading with the daily sunlight. Worn scrolls were piled in the wooden nooks near my bed. My window looked out over the street below, out into the Keramikos. As I opened the curtain, I could see the light from my father's lantern reflected in the dishwater. Should I check in? Was he ill? I was the one who wasted the wax, reading in secret until dawn's chariot crested the horizon. My father woke early, often before I went to sleep. The oil in his lamps went unchanged for months. Why was he still awake? I returned to my door and opened it again, letting the hinge creak, and closed it with a faint thunk. A breath and a heartbeat marked the passage of time. My father's light went out.
So does anyone have any questions for Alex? Hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I love the Black West.
Thank you very much. I picked it up especially for this. I'm quite a fan.
It picked me.
Thank you.
Thank you for the insights into your writing process and everything. That's fascinating. So I wonder, and I guess you covered parts of it already, but I still wonder to me, today in Britain, classics is something that's strongly associated with being stuck in outright conservative. For
Yeah.
studies,
Mm.
studying classics, it's a lot of people I think see it as an upper class pursuit. But you try to speak revolution, speak feminism through the classical world. So yeah, how do you reach the people? What does ancient Greece give to the people? Why is this the right setting for you to reach people with this story?
That is an excellent question. I'm going to go ahead and repeat it for the streaming. So the question is that classical studies, classical Greece, is often so much seen as something sort of stuffy and upper crust and quite conservative. And why is that something, like, what does that bring as a setting here? And I think my reasoning for that is that quite a lot of people is history, actually. So the reason why it's perceived that way, I feel, is the people who initially sort of studied antiquity were not really in it to study antiquity. They were in it to, it was perceived as sort of the history of Britain. It was perceived as sort of like this stolen English history, and it was quite colonial. There was a man who pretty much every archaeologist in the world absolutely despises, Heinrich Schliemann, who decided that he loved the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey so much he was going to trace down from the books, which was actually quite clever, the sites of the wars and like the castle of Agamemnon. And he succeeded, which congratulations, like great find. We're all very happy that we know where it was. But he wasn't in it for the archaeology, he was looking for gold. And he dug through, in the site of Troy, he dug through the layer that probably corresponds to the battles that he was searching for that actually happened. Because he wasn't looking for the information, he was looking for the gold. He was looking for the things that he could literally put on his wife and take pictures of her and say, look, she's just like Helen. And I think a lot of the people who initially studied the classics were kind of doing the same thing. They were looking for things that were glorious. And it came from a true place of love. Like I said, I mean, and I myself am guilty of that. Like when I first started looking into this stuff, it was because I really liked reading the mythology stories, which is not a bad place to start, but at a certain point, it's something you need to start researching, like the reality of it, and not just taking the vibes from it. And I mean, it causes real damage. There are lots of Greek authors who will publish stories like mine, and then it just gets nothing out there because it has been so associated with the UK and the US for that matter. But sort of going back to your question there, a lot of the people who were initially studying this stuff were looking at it because they were looking for something that was the glory of Britain and the history of Britain. And because of that, a lot of the parts that make it so much more personal and so much more useful were kind of erased. And people who are studying classics nowadays, it's gotten quite different. My friends who study classics are generally female or some flavor of queer LGBT something, or just or people who are, you know, not from a particularly like upper class, and they study it because they see something in themselves. So one of the things I really like about the relationships in here, they are very so I'm going to use the word queer in an odd way here. I'm going to say they're queer in that they are not conforming to the time of the standards of what a relationship was. I'm not a big fan. I'm a big fan of using labels if it's something that can sort of like see like, okay, this, we have always been here. I'm not necessarily a big fan of using labels as determiners because it doesn't quite match the history. But the relationships in this book are queer for the time in the sense that they don't necessarily fit in what was there. But by doing so, it's also an exploration of what was there. So the things that we can get from it are sort of, number one, we can deconstruct what we think of as something that is immutably normal. And that's true with all history. Number two, the ideas of feminism and what it, like, you know, what and womanism and what it is to sort of be female in these societies is actually much more complicated than a lot of the original archaeologists and classicists would have you believe. Ancient Sparta was not, I wouldn't say incredibly feminist, but it was feminist enough that a number of the men running Sparta got very concerned about the downfall of Sparta because women were too into politics, which I consider a victory. And number three, it really challenges our perceptions of gender. Queer female relationships were less heard of, but they were still present. I mean, we have Sappho today for a reason. Queer male relationships were something that was commonplace. It wasn't necessarily commonplace in that a man was expected to marry and have an heir, but having a boyfriend outside of the relationship was rather normal, actually. And there is actually a bit in here that is a direct translation of Aristophanes, where he's talking about his ideas of love. And to paraphrase it, he has this whole thing in Plato's Dialogues, Symposium, where he's talking about like where love came from. And he says that he says that gay men were once like attached. So humankind was basically made with two people stuck together rather than one person. And they were too powerful that way. And so the gods cut them in half.
If you're interested in this, there's a wonderful film called Hedwig and the Angry Inch, which deals with it in a musical form.
Yes. So gay men were two men that were cut in half. Gay women were two women that were cut in half, and heterosexuals had been one man and one woman, in which case they're like a third of the population according to Aristophanes. So there's a lot of stuff there that is not necessarily what you would expect, I think. I keep seeing all of these claims that people are like queering the classics, and I'm like, are you?
They were pretty queer already.
Yeah, it's not like that's not the case. It's so much more diverse than what you would expect. It does have its limitations. It does have its problems. It does have, like, I certainly don't want to make the mistake of saying, oh, this was like this wonderful history where, I don't know, it sort of gets into noble savage territory at that point, I think. But things were just so different that by examining that and examining our own biases today, there's so much we can learn from them. I hope that answers your question. Fantastic.
Would anyone else like to ask a question? No? Would you like to read a little bit more?
I think I can read a little bit more. Does everybody? Is that good?
We've got time for a little.
Okay, yeah, I see lots of nodding. Okay. One second. Let me find a spot here. Okay. I'm going to read just a few pages. This is the end of chapter 1. Night sounds. The running of water, draining down the street from recent rain. The faint song of machinery, a shifting volume as the owls pass to the street, the steady lines of their glow accompanied by lazy clockwork ticking. A distant bridal procession and its overwhelming song. The low rumble of symposia. A lone cart's wheels on the cobblestones, signaling a late return home. My toes curled against the cool comfort of my sheets, and my gaze rested on the painted ceiling. The breath of Athens drifted through my window, slow as sea foam, carrying with it the memory of salt and olives. I felt my chest rise and fall in even lengths, in time with the ebbing tide of the night. There are few places as peaceful as one's childhood bedroom on the night of a full moon, or as safe. And yet the lightning wrenched against my heartbeat. Something was wrong. I had liked the play. I liked Aristophanes. He knew what he was doing. Humor was his best with a bit of truth behind it. And yet, why exactly was it so funny? The indignation lurched me upright. The concept itself, women in the assembly, was a dream, not an absurdity. I trained as an orator by my father's side since the day he freed the slaves. I was eloquent and brilliant with a wit to rival Odysseus. Perhaps a dangerous thought, but a true one. I knew my own capabilities, and yet Aethon was the one touted as the heir to both our father's legacies. Aethon, bless him, with his ox eyes that dulled over halfway through his sentence. Aethon, who wanted nothing more than to spend his days swimming and climbing trees. White-armed Aethon, lovely-haired Aethon, Aethon, whom I adored, but was, in an honest world, just born to take up the mantle of wife. He was supposed to be the orator? He was supposed to sway the hearts and minds of the city? Athens still murmured. Wind chimes, shuffling horses, a muted conversation in the dark. My heart beat with all the desperation of the roaring sea, crashing against the rock cliff of inequity. I was well familiar with the stories of women who dared anger at the unfairness of the world, women who went mad for the sake of men, for the sake of love, for the sake of politics. I felt a cord tighten around my heart, something ancient tying me back to Helen, to Circe, the Hera herself. There was no inherent humor in a woman ruler. What about my talent sparked the use of my name as the punchline of a joke? What exactly was so unexpected about competence or intelligence? Was that so unthinkable? Was that so rare? And why, in every story, was it something that demanded punishment? I was out of my bed now, pacing the circuit of my room. For a moment, it seemed as if I could still see the actors' masks before me and behind me and surrounding me like a vision, in all the audacity of their color. I could see the turning of their gears, the tragic faces slowly distorting into smiles, into laughter, into mocking joy. And they were nothing compared to the sight of my own naked face as I caught it in my bedroom mirror. I had removed the daily pigment, the charcoal around my eyes, the whitening and rouge on my cheeks. My hair was uncombed and mussed from the bed. I was unclothed. And turning the page. No painted peplos, not even a sheet to warm me, and I was a sight wild with emotion. There was a Maenad quality to my posture, a look in my eyes as dark as the wine in the sea. I thought of my friends, of my father's friends, of Nico himself. Would they recognize this creature in the mirror? Hephaestion might. Aethon would tell me to pull myself together. Nico would call me a child. They didn't understand that facet of my cut, the anger, the indignation. They knew me as composed, competent. And the men of Athens were even worse. They saw me as a girl, precocious and fierce, but no threat to their traditions. I was an unmarried curiosity, a source of pride to my father, and a point with which to tease him. I was not my own person. To them, I had no agency of self, which was, to some extent, my own fault. Once you know a person's perception of you, they become easy to navigate. Masks serve a purpose, in theater and in life. No more. If I was to be known to the world, I would be known as myself, with pride and anger and all my sins exposed. Let them stop me. Let them see me.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you for such a hugely entertaining and diverting hour. And thank you to you for coming here in person, and thank you to everyone who's watching over the stream. And now I think you're going to sign some books.
I think I am, yes. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
All right.